Right. Well, thank you very much for coming to the Western Standard Studios, Mr. Aitchison. I've been looking forward to it. We've been watching the Conservative leadership race with a lot of interest. It's been an interesting one already, lively, I guess you could say, and different. A lot of contenders. There's six of you going for it, and the campaign's going to be a long one, going all the way till September 10th. So I'm glad we got a chance to speak early because I'm certain there's going to be a lot of developments as the campaign unfolds.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great honor to be here. I've my first time at the Western Standard, so it's great to be here.
Yeah, and so you're out west, and you're a member of Parliament from out in Ontario. You've been active in politics for quite some time. So maybe I'll start, I guess, with a bit of your campaign challenges that'll come out when getting across the country. It's a weighted system for the leadership. So many votes per riding. So you certainly have to reach out to every region and develop support and bring that in. How's that been going for you as you travel in your campaign so far?
Well, it's been going well. As you mentioned, I'm a newer member of Parliament, and probably as famous as a former mayor of small town Ontario community would be. But the message is resonating. We're really pleased with it, and we've been doing an awful lot of social media and digital outreach as well. So touring across the country has been a lot of fun. It's been great to meet Conservatives from coast to coast.
Great, and I mean, as I kind of said earlier, with six candidates in a field, I mean, it's hard to stand out, but one of the things, and I want to talk a bit about the debates, but the first debate, and I watched it was the unofficial one, I guess, right, with the Canada Strong and Free Network. The way you stood out, actually, I found to be a calm voice of reason, whilst the others were quite frisky with each other, I guess, to say it politely, but you stuck to your message and you were quiet. But at the same time, it's hard, and I appreciated that. I think a lot of viewers appreciated that, and that's when they discovered you that night, I think. But at the same time, it must be difficult for you, because it's hard to stand out in that crowd when the other two are stealing the spotlight.
Well, I think the tone is really, really important. It's going to be very important in the next election. And I think that when we talk about, what's going on in Ottawa or what's not going on in Ottawa, as it might be, I spoke about this most recently in my speech in response to the government's use of the Emergency Measures Act related to the convoy in Ottawa. The way we talk about, dividing Canadians and pitting each other against each other to win votes, that kind of divisive rhetoric and that kind of, zero-sum game approach to politics, winning is everything, it might serve your short-term purposes, but it actually divides the country. And I just think that we need to be, as Conservatives particularly, have an opportunity as a truly national party with representation across the country to talk about the things that unites us and brings us together. And I don't think it's easy to do that if we're fighting amongst ourselves. And I think we need to build trust amongst, Canadians that live in areas where we haven't been winning. And so the best way to do that is, I think, is with a principled conservative message, but also delivering that message with a tone of respect. We need to be listening to each other and build that trust and show some unity. It doesn't have to be uniform, but we have to be unified.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, the infighting can be devastating to a party, and I don't expect you to speak to our provincial issues, but we are experiencing quite something here, with the United Conservative Party that came in with such a strong majority, and right now in public polling, they're in abysmal shape within Alberta, and much of it's due to the fact that they've all been at each other's throats for the last couple of years rather than managing the province. And as we see, as you said, some of the tone coming out in this race, there's a risk of that. I mean, if you divide the party too much, it could damage the whole.
Well, I think listen. There's no shortage of I think frustration across the country, really, especially related to COVID and lockdowns and the uncertainty of it and the length of lockdowns. There's no question there's frustration and anger. I get that, but just fanning the flames of that anger doesn't actually solve any problems. I think it's important for us to be talking about policy ideas. I think elections are perfect opportunities for us to talk policy. And so instead of attacking each other, we should be talking about ideas that Conservatives want to talk about and that we can then talk to the rest of Canadians about and sell our message and form a majority government.
And getting into some of those mechanisms, as I warned you, I did want to talk a little bit about those two debates. They were radically different from each other. The first one, as I said, was very adversarial, very heated, kind of allowed for a free-for-all. The second one was exceedingly moderated, very unusually so, with the paddles and the horn interrupting people and things such as that. I'll just speak my own point of view. I don't think either worked well to communicate the message of the candidates out to people or terribly effectively. what are ways that these events perhaps could be improved? Because we do want to see all the candidates, we want to see that interchange and such, but um, where can we hit the mark with these sorts of events?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how we can improve them, but this much I do know is that the second debate, while I mean, it's certainly a little bit goofy in certain parts, at least there was a little more, meat on the bone. There's a little more policy discussion. I think that's important. We didn't get into, I think, enough policy issues. We didn't really talk enough about foreign policy. We didn't talk enough about housing. I feel like I missed an opportunity to talk more about housing. So it was a bit better for sure. But I guess it speaks to the importance of all the candidates making sure they get their message out and crisscrossing the country and talking to conservatives about ideas to bring the country, move the country forward, and to present a platform to Canadians that will resonate not just in the areas we consistently win, but where we need to win as well.
Great. Now, housing, I mean, that's a big issue. It's an acute one, and you've made it a large part of your platform. Young people, I can't imagine how they can get into the housing market right now. I mean, inflation's hitting us all around, but we've got a massive housing shortage. The supply is the issue. People wanting to get into the market. We got a labor shortage. I mean, it's a very complicated issue, but it's pressing. I guess that's part of the largest part where you're standing out. Could you want to expand a bit on your housing policy and how you'd like to?
Well, I mean, I speak to this issue of housing. It's in part one of the reasons why I left my job as mayor of my community to run federally, because, of course, at the local level in Huntsville, we were doing all kinds of things. We were partnering with developers. We were giving land away to Habitat for Humanity. We were waiving fees and doing all kinds of stuff. But what was missing always was a reliable federal partner to help with funding more than anything else, to just bridge the gap on maybe affordable rental units, for example, to make those numbers add up and make sense. And so it's the biggest reason why I decided to run ultimately. And of course, I got to Ottawa and find a Liberal government that is long on promises. They've lots of funding announcements and photo ops with funding announcements, but you haven't seen many ribbon cuttings. And that's because they're just not getting the job done. And so the government, of course, of Canada can't just wave a magic wand and just, tell cities how to run their show. But I believe strongly that the federal government can take leadership, working collaboratively with provinces and cities to help, reduce the backlog. In larger centers, it can take up to 2 or 3 years to get zoning approval and site plan approval and all the approvals required to just get shovels in the ground. When you're in a housing crisis, when supply is the issue, that's not acceptable. Canadians are suffering, and we need to do better. And so the federal government can take leadership by tying the billions of dollars that the federal government assists municipalities and provinces with on infrastructure to real results on the ground. And so I say we can work together to eliminate things like exclusionary zoning. We can increase densities without affecting character in all kinds of neighborhoods all across Canada. And that's something that we absolutely have to get done. Just talking about it and promising money isn't getting the job done.
That's where your municipal experience can apply towards this sort of negotiation. And actually, it's a subject I've been on a lot here in Calgary. We're actually at 8 years right now from plan to development at this point. And of course, your development could be shut down at any point throughout that process too. And that's left us with a terrible backlog.
Well, and this is the thing. I guess it's where I probably, I bring a lot of experience in this regard. I mean, Huntsville's a lot smaller community, but the principles are the same and the process is generally similar. Development and investment they really like certainty. They don't like instability. They don't like uncertainty. These timelines, these processes, there's no reason why there can't be, specific timelines related to getting things done getting through this process. I used to do that as the chair of planning in my community, and then as the mayor, we guaranteed timelines to get reports and approvals done. We didn't skip any steps. We didn't skirt any corners. We didn't loosen the rules. But we made it very clear that these are the rules. You follow these rules, we can proceed. And developers worked really well with that because it was certainty. Just tell us the rules. Part of the problem you have right now in municipalities, in a lot of cases, especially larger centers, you have ward councillors that they kind of treat their wards like their own fiefdom, and of course the loudest voices in the room tend to get the most attention. And you have YIMBYs, and so I've got a YIMBY plan. Yes, in my backyard, we need to increase those densities. We need to improve these processes. We need to speed up the timelines, and the federal government can play a leadership role in working with the provinces and cities to get that done. I speak that language. I've been doing it for years. creating collaboration, partnerships, and moving things forward.
Great. Another area, and it speaks to inflationary values, and it's a spot where you've stood out from other candidates as well. And it's not an issue that you hear a lot coast to coast, but it's supply management. It's Canada's dairy poultry management system. It's been around since, I believe, the early 70s. You're the, well, I believe Mr. Baber's now come out against it, but initially you were the only candidate who's spoken out against that policy. Why have you decided to take that stance when the others wouldn't?
Well, for me, this is all about affordability, but it's also about opportunity. So supply management costs the average Canadian family about $600 a year in their grocery bill. So it's making milk and cheese and dairy products more expensive. And that's particularly difficult in a time when carbon taxes are making life more expensive and inflation is making life more expensive. I represent people in my community, and I know there are people across this country that are struggling to heat their homes and put real food on the table. The other side of this issue, of course, is that farmers are trapped in a system that limits their potential, limits their opportunity. New Zealand, a country of 5 million people, exported $17 billion worth of dairy products around the world last year. Canada, a country of almost 40 million people, exported 378 million. There's huge opportunity to be unleashed for Canadian farmers that produce world-class dairy products that can market it to the world. And so I don't think this is a question of pitting farmers against consumers. I think it's a question of making life more affordable for Canadian families, but I also see it as an opportunity for the government to assist in a transition away from a system that maintains a status quo and it might be stable, but transitions away from that system and in collaboration and cooperation with farmers helps them create new markets around the world that farmers can then realize a lot more potential.
Yeah, and it's understandable. You can't just flick a switch and stop the system. It would disrupt the entire markets and put people bankrupt. I mean, they're heavily invested in those quotas, but just seeing somebody start to say, "Well, we've got to set an end to this," is finally a good start. So
well, they're vested interests. I mean, I think the dairy lobby is pretty powerful on Parliament Hill, and I just think that they're missing out on an opportunity. And if we work together, we can make Canadian dairy, a coveted products across the world.
So speaking across the country, then getting on to unity, it's a big, broad issue, and it's one in Canada we've always got. Quebec used to be the more acute one. You'd hear more through the 80s and 90s, but now in the West, we're getting pretty upset with a lot of policies out here. One that recently came up was the court ruling on C-69. It's now heading to the Supreme Court of Canada, where we'll see. I don't hold out a lot of confidence it's going to uphold the provincial ruling, but we'll see. But we've felt a lot in the West that we've been either ignored or taken for granted or at times even outright abused by the government. How could you mend some of that national unity right now when people are feeling so divided?
Well, and this is one of the key issues that I think speaks to this divisive rhetoric that we've seen. We've seen a Liberal government for the last 7 years that has been quite happy to demonize Western Canadians and particularly Albertans and Saskatchewan. What's a Saskatchewanian, I guess?
Yeah,
Saskatchewanian,
right, yes.
I guess. But happy to demonize the hardworking folks in these two provinces that are the energy superpower of our country to win votes in downtown Toronto. What we need to talk to each other about is the fact that not only is Canadian energy the most ethically produced energy in the world, but we're bringing in things, oil from places like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela that is not ethically produced. And the other important factor, of course, is that the oil sands here in Fort McMurray has reduced their carbon output on their production by 30% over the last 15 years. They're responsible. These are responsible producers that are doing their part to help reduce Canada's footprint overall. So we need to listen to each other. This is part of the challenge. We need to start listening to each other as Canadians and recognizing that Albertans care as much about the future of this planet as do people in downtown Toronto. And I know there's people in downtown Toronto that think taxes are too high as well. So we need leaders that actually start talking about things that unites us, brings us together, instead of focusing on ways to win elections through division. This is a key area. This is an absolutely key area.
Okay, about and I've asked every other candidate on this too, and it's a tough one, is equalization. I understand it's constitutionally entrenched,
right?
But there is room to work perhaps on the formula or ways that it's administered and things like that without tearing open the nightmare of the Constitution.
Right.
Would you look at addressing equalization, as many out here feel that perhaps it's not been applied fairly or properly over the last few decades?
Yeah, I actually think that equalization is one piece of a much broader conversation that the federal government needs to have with the provinces. I think that the relationship that exists now between the federal government and provincial governments is unhealthy. And a big part of that is equalization, but another big part of that is our healthcare system. Canadians wear as a badge of honor, almost part of our identity, that we have this amazing healthcare system. It's the best in the world. And the truth of the matter is, it's not the best in the world. It's failing Canadians. It's part of the reasons. It's one of the things that I hope we have learned through COVID-19 is that we don't have the best healthcare system in the world. And part of the reason for that is, of course, it was created on a promise from the federal government, meddling in provincial affairs again, to pay 50% of the cost. We've never lived up to that promise as a federal government. And as a result, you see provinces struggling to keep up with, the growing burden of healthcare services, and they're not fiscally sustainable as a result. I think it's time for a more respectful relationship between the federal government and the provinces on all of these issues, and to create more fairness in the system that actually respects the role of the provinces and gets the federal government out of meddling in provincial affairs. The provinces actually run this country. They actually run the country.
A lot could be avoided if we just stick to the jurisdictional things we already have in the Constitution.
And honestly, the federal government was created. You look at the Constitution, the provinces came together and created this federal government for a lot of different reasons. One of which, though, was to actually help create new markets in the world. And if the federal government focused on the things that it was meant to do, things like making sure we have a well-equipped armed services, instead of playing games with provincial services, we could focus on the things that we're supposed to. And we wouldn't have embarrassing situations like we have right now, where we've taken decades too long to replace fighter jets that are almost 50 years old. And we would be a reliable partner with our allies. And our allies wouldn't be creating new alliances without us because we just won't show up to the table. We haven't been a reliable partner. So the federal government needs to get back to doing what it was created to do in the first place and start doing it well.
Great. Well, before I let you go, are there some other policy points you want to hit before I let you out of the studio and back onto the campaign trail?
Well, we could talk for hours
Yes,
about policy, but
looking at one perhaps.
But honestly, the biggest thing for me is about affordability. This is a question about affordability for Canadians across this country. I think that this race should be about policies that make life more affordable for Canadians. And I think if that is our message as Conservatives going forward, we will form the next government. We can get rid of a tired Liberal government.
Great. So where can people find more information about your campaign and follow up or support?
It's very easy. Since nobody knows how to pronounce or spell my last name, my website is votescott.ca.
Okay.
It's very easy.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. But I think Mr. Polyev has still had more name mispronunciations going on.
He probably has,
than
actually,
yourself. You're second. Well, thank you very much for coming in to join us today.
Thank you.
And I look forward to talking to you again down the road.
Thanks again.